All right, let's start getting our attention up here. We're going to get started real quick. So, just a little background to get us back into a mindset of where we are at tonight. This is the third week in this lesson that we have been walking through called Returned. And so we have looked at different areas or different things. We saw the idea of the wrong fit, where the prodigal son, the main person in the story, has went out. He took his father's inheritance. He thought that the right fit would be the things that the world had to offer, and he quickly found out it was a wrong fit for him. So you have this guy who asks his father for an early inheritance. He is given it. He goes out. He blows it on the things of the world. He's found eating out of the pig pen. He has no food, no things. And so he says, I'm going to return to my father, and maybe he will at least make me a slave. So we saw the idea of the wrong fit. Last week we looked at the idea of the warranty. And we saw that the father accepted the son back with open arms, with forgiveness. Not only that, he celebrated. He threw a party. And we saw the idea that God's love doesn't have a warranty. It doesn't matter how far we've run. It doesn't matter how fast we've run away from him. When we return back to him, he is going to accept us back with forgiveness and with open arms. Tonight we're going to look at the idea of the worn out as we look at the other son in the story. The older son who was faithful, who stayed with his father, who sees his younger brother return home, and he does not have the reaction that he should probably have. So the question that we're going to have to get us started tonight is, what wears you out? What is something that wears you out? School, basketball, cross country, baseball. There was something over here. Baseball. TikTok wears you out. Wow. Being mad or angry. So yeah, being mad or angry wears you out. So there's a lot of things that wear you out, right? You get tired. And so if you get tired, it's kind of like the Snickers commercial. You're not you when you're hungry. You're also not you when you're worn out. When you're worn out, you're more likely to give up on something that you don't want to do. You're more likely to be a little bit snippy or to snap back or to talk back because you're just tired. You're not yourself. You're fed up. You're at the end of your rope. And so you just can't do it anymore. There are times when you're just so tired you don't know where to go. I know that in high school you have a lot of different plates spinning. You're trying to make good grades. You're trying to have a social life. You're trying to do extracurricular activities, whether it's beta or band or sports or whatever you're doing. And maybe you're working, so you have a job where you're trying to get a little bit of money because you want to be able to drive or go out to eat or whatever. And so your life is busy. And so you're trying to figure out, how do I balance school and my family and church and work and all of these different pressures that are pulling at me. And if you're anything like I was, you didn't want to disappoint anybody. You didn't want to let anybody down. And so you work really, really hard to be the best for everybody that you can be. But to be honest, sometimes we just get worn out. And sometimes we get tired. And when we get tired, we forget all of the good that's going on around us. That's a sad thing, I think, about the idea of being worn out, is we start forgetting the blessings of what's happening around us. So we're going to look at this story of the prodigal son. So just remember all the things that have happened. The younger brother has asked for his inheritance. He's received it. He's blown it on things of the world. He's come back to the father. The father has accepted the son back with forgiveness. He is throwing a party. And as he has announced that they're about to throw a party, in verse 25, we pick up with the younger son. And it says this: Now his older son was in the field, and he came near the house. He heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants and asked what these things meant. Your brother is here, he told him, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. But he replied to his father, Look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your resources with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him? Son, he said to him, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost, but now he is found. So we're going to see three things real quick tonight on this idea of the worn out. And the first thing we see is the unnoticed obedience. The unnoticed obedience. So the first thing that normally happens when we start getting worn out is we start thinking that people aren't noticing all of the good things that we're doing. When we start getting tired, when we start working really hard and we just don't have the energy anymore, then we start thinking that people are taking us for granted. That's exactly what this brother thought in the story. He thought, look, I've been here slaving away for years. I didn't ask for my inheritance. I didn't ask for any of these resources like my brother did. I've been faithful to my father. I've probably actually, instead of cost my father money, earned my father money. And yet when my younger brother comes back, he throws him a party. He's never thrown me a party. And so the unnoticed obedience. You can tell the older brother had been working hard. He had been doing good things, but he thought that what he was doing was going unnoticed. That may be you tonight. You may have worked hard. You might have been really trying to live for Jesus, and you just don't feel like anybody notices. You don't feel like your parents are noticing your efforts you're putting forward. Maybe you don't feel like us at the church have realized how you've been faithful in coming to small groups or to Wednesday nights. Maybe you're like, man, it seems like everybody else, all of my friends who just live for the world and do all these things, man, it seems like they have it so easy, and I'm trying to be obedient to my parents. I'm trying to be obedient to God, and yet I just don't feel like people are noticing. I don't feel like they're and it's tiring, and it starts getting worn out. And so the first thing we see when we start getting tired is we feel like there is unnoticed obedience that goes by. But not only is there unnoticed obedience, there's unappreciated offering. So what was this guy offering? Man, he was offering his entire life to his father, right? He had stayed close to home. He had worked hard. He didn't go out and just squander, throw away his father's resources, but yet he stayed and he worked, and he was the good, diligent son. But he thought that he was unappreciated. Not only did he think that his father wasn't noticing him, but he thought he was unappreciating him. And when you feel like you're not being appreciated, then you're going to stop working as hard as you once did. I've always heard the saying, and I don't know if you've heard this or not, you may not have, but as you're starting to maybe enter the workforce, or you're going to be entering the workforce, I've heard the saying that people don't quit a job, they quit a boss, which is true a lot of times. Most times people will go through a lot of crap if they feel like they're appreciated and they feel like people care for them. But you could have the best benefits in the world, but if your leadership is not good, if you don't feel like you're truly appreciated, then you're not going to sacrifice anything. You might punch the time card, but you will get there the last second you have to get there, and you will leave the second you can leave. But if you feel appreciated, then you might do the little extra. You might get there a little bit early. You might leave a little bit later if you feel like you're being appreciated. And it was obvious this son in the story, he didn't feel like he had been appreciated because he had stayed. But he said, Father, you didn't throw me a party. Father, you haven't let me invite my friends over and you slaughter a calf and we have some steaks and potatoes. Like, this has never happened, and yet you're doing it for your younger son who took his money and he ran away with it. He was worn out. He was tired. Whether these things were true or not, that's how the older son, his perspective looked at it. And to be honest, a lot of times in our lives when we get worn out, our perspective gets a little bit skewed. So we might not actually be unnoticed or unappreciated, but we might feel that way. And usually our perception is our reality. And so we see the unnoticed obedience, the unappreciated offering, but then last we see the untapped opportunity. The untapped opportunity. I think that we see a very telling sign in this story that kind of leads us back to what we can start doing if we get worn out. And that's remembering the opportunities that we have in front of us, even if we're tired and we don't see them. Look what the Father says in verse 31. He says, "Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." Everything I have is yours. What do we see here? We see that the Father had noticed that the Son had been working. He noticed that he was with him. He appreciated his work. If we were to be honest, if you look at this day and age and what happened, the older son would have received far more inheritance than his younger brother would have. So even though the younger son threw his money away, it didn't impact at all what the older son was going to receive when his father passed. It didn't change the fact that the older son was going to even get an inheritance at all. The older son was going to get far more than the younger son would have ever dreamed of throwing away because he was the oldest. And in those days, the oldest got a majority of the estate. And then they split the rest of it up between the younger siblings, starting with the males and then the females. And so the older son was still going to get his. That wasn't the point. But the Father says, all that I have is yours. Not just your inheritance part, but he was pretty much saying, anything you ask of me, I would have given to you. So maybe tonight you're worn out. Maybe it's from your parents or your small group leaders or maybe God. Maybe you're worn out from trying to do the good things and you're like, God, I don't feel like you're noticing how hard I'm trying as a teenager. None of my friends are trying as hard as I'm trying, God. And I just don't feel like I'm receiving anything. Tonight, remember that you have probably untapped opportunity. That if you were to ask of your parents or ask of us here at the church or ask of God, you would probably receive far more than you could ever imagine. God wasn't holding, or the Father in this story wasn't holding anything back from his son, his older son. He didn't love him any less. He didn't want to not throw him a party any more than he wanted to throw the younger son the party. He still wanted to do that. He even said that. He said, son, it's not that I don't love you. It's not that I don't want to celebrate you, but we're celebrating your younger brother too because he was once gone, but now he's back. He was once dead, now he's alive. But when we get tired, when we get worn out, what do? We start acting like the world revolves around us. It's all about me, me, me. What do I want? How am I being treated? How am I the victim in this situation? And this is what can happen. You can be exactly like the brother in this story and play the victim and say that everybody's against you and nobody treats you right and nobody notices you and nobody appreciates you. And that can be the persona. That can be what you reflect to other people. And you have that opportunity to do that. And you might even be able to bring up examples where you were passed over, where you were underappreciated. You could probably do that. And people might start listening for a little bit, but I promise you that is not a life that will lead to any kind of blessing or any kind of opportunity or any great potential. We see that the ones who receive the greatest blessing, not only from the Father in this story, but from God in the world, are the ones who are humble and say, you know what, it's not about me. And while, yes, I've been obedient, and while I've been sacrificing and working hard, I'm going to celebrate when people go from death to life, because this is what can happen. We can be the greatest Christian that we could be, and we have a friend that has been living for the world, and then they come in and they start coming to church and they get saved, and we almost look down on them because we see other people celebrate that this person has now come to Jesus, and we're like, oh, they're just doing it for a show. You don't know what they did last weekend. I can't believe they came to church today. You ought to know what they did last night. And instead of celebrating that they're trying to get their life back on the right track, we're more tired and we're worn out, and it just kind of makes us not very pleasant to be around. It makes us miss out on the good things that are happening. What a beautiful thing that happened in this story. You had a son who hated his father enough that he basically said he wished he was dead, and then he returned home. People should rejoice about that, right? There is reconciliation happening. There is relationship building coming back. Who knows how long this son had been gone, but now he had returned home, and as his brother, he should have loved him. He should have been joining with the father and running toward him and throwing his arms around it. Instead, he wouldn't even go inside. He missed out on the celebration. He missed out on the blessing. He missed out on the party. He could have received all of the same things the brother was receiving. He'd have received the same plate of food. He'd have received the same party. But see, what he wanted was the recognition to be on him. And a lot of times in God's kingdom, we will miss out on blessings if we are the ones who want the recognition. If we have to make it about us, if we have to be the one standing on stage with the spotlight on us, and every time we do a good thing, we expect people to lift us up on a pedestal, and when it doesn't happen and we get tired and we get worn up, what happens? Then instead of being the obedient person who is doing the sacrifices, we become just like the prodigal son at the beginning of the story and start running away. I don't know what happened. The story doesn't tell us what the older son did after this. It doesn't tell us his response. It doesn't tell us if he went back into the party. It doesn't tell us if he said, well, fine then, Father, give me my inheritance and I'm going to leave too. We don't know. But we know that he had an opportunity. He was at a crossroads. He could have either acted like his younger brother and ran off, or he could have said, you know what, Dad, you're right. I'm just tired. I've been worn out. And I'm glad my brother's returning. You know what? I want to return too. And I want to renew my obedience to you. And I want to renew my faithfulness to you. Tonight, I know that you're probably tired. 2020, the beginning of 2021, has been a very tiring time. Emotionally, physically, mentally, just every aspect. You're beat down, you're worn out because you're trying to do things different than you've ever done them before. There has never been a generation who's tried to figure out high school in the midst of a pandemic like you have, where you're trying to figure out, am I going to be on campus? Am I going to be virtual? How is this going to look about all of these different things? And everything is just up in the air, and yet you're still expected to perform at your highest potential and ability. And I know that you're tired and you're worn out. And so tonight, what I want to encourage you is, don't become cynical like the older brother in this story and miss out on what God is doing. Because God is still moving. God is still moving in our church. God is still moving in our community. God is still moving in people's lives. You know, we were just able to go to a conference a few weekends ago where hundreds of teenagers your age gave their life to Jesus. And out of the 4,000 or 5,000 people who joined from all across the Southeast, less than 1% went home and contracted any kind of sickness, which is just astronomical to even think about, which just shows that God is protecting and providing and allowing his people to meet together again, which is a beautiful thing. Just think of all the great things that have happened in our church. We're in a building that has been prayed for years and years. Our church family has prayed for this building, the MAC, to be built far beyond you were born. Probably when your parents were kids or they were toddlers, First Baptist Church was trying to fathom building a building like this. And in the middle of a pandemic, not only were we able to build this building, but we were able to pay a large chunk down on this building. We're able to, in a few weeks, host a conference that only 3 other student ministries in the whole country is able to host in the Strength to Stand Tour. First Baptist Church of Lexington, Tennessee is able to host this conference. And we're able to bring in churches. We have churches from Arkansas and Middle Tennessee and all around us coming into our facilities. And all we have to do is drive across the road. God is moving. But this is what could happen. In the middle of all the good things that God is doing, in the middle of salvations, in the middle of building plans and projects and conferences, you can get tired and you can get worn out. And you can get the wrong perspective, and instead of celebrating all the good that God is doing, you can become cynical about it. And if the spotlight gets off of you for a second, then you can miss it. You can miss the good things that God is doing because you're tired and you're worn out. So tonight, if that's you, if you're tired, if you're worn out, I would just encourage you, return to the Father. Return to him tonight. I don't know if the older brother did that in the story, but I hope that that is your call tonight, that you are going to return to him, you're going to renew your energy, and you're going to celebrate in his blessings tonight. I'm going to pray for us. We're going to head to small groups. We're going to have a great night. Respond how God is calling you to. God, be with us tonight in small groups. If we're tired, if we're worn out, renew our energy in you. It's in your son Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. You are dismissed.